should be ashamed of who you are. You should be ashamed to be English. You should be ashamed to be male. Ashamed of your own importance. Guilty, your privilege, all this nonsense. Collaborate with people of a different group against your own group in order to obtain power over your group. The individually oriented moral foundations are concerned with equality so that you as an individual get more, relatively not what more, and harm avoidance so that you as an individual are not harmed.
Hi everybody, and welcome back to Nick Talks. This episode's amazing guest is a returning guest. It's someone you've definitely heard of, someone you definitely watched videos of, and it's a jolly heretic. You okay, Ed? How are you doing?
I'm okay. Yes, it's a fascinating collection of masks on the wall there. I think I've noticed that before.
Yes. Well,
Africa.
Yes, some are from Africa. One of them is from Cambodia. I've spent many years backpacking around the world over decades, and I usually buy something from a place I've not been to before, and I stick them on that wall behind me. So there's all sorts of things. In the middle, when I first did that wall about 2 years ago, in the middle were some pictures of Che Guevara from Cuba. And I had to take him down because I was constantly being accused of being a socialist, a communist. Why have you got that on your wall? And no one could understand. It's just a wall of mementos of me traveling.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
I've hit on an idea, and I'm writing my 5th book at the moment. And I've realized that I don't know much in the world. I'm not an educated man. I wouldn't class myself as an academic or even that intelligent. So I've come up with a topic about anglophobia for my next book. And I've started asking people and bringing them on a podcast for certain sections of the book who know more than me. And I find it's an easy way to write a book is you ask people who know more than you. So I've asked you to come along today for one of the chapters, which is about self-hate. Anglophobia is, as you know, is the hatred of the English, and that can be extended to British, Anglosphere, and basically white people. So my first question to you is, why do some people hate themselves? What's behind that?
Well, at the individual level, the main factor behind negative feelings, which would include low self-esteem, which presumably converge over in particularly severe cases into hating yourself, is a construct known as neuroticism, which is that you feel negative feelings strongly. So you very strongly feel things like sadness or anger or hatred or whatever. And in some people, and one might say it's quite a maladaptive, there's perhaps something adaptive to having moderately low self-esteem, maybe, because it allows you to get on with other people, to be humble, to back down in fights and not get killed. There may be something adaptive about some degree. And also, how can you fit in with a group? And we are a pack species. If you don't, to some degree, accept authority over you, and in that sense have an element of not of low self-esteem, or at least not very, very high self-esteem. There can't be too many people going around that have very high self-esteem. So you can see there's something adaptive about that. But if you have negative, feeling, although actually that interestingly correlates with agreeableness, people that are high in agreeableness, that are pro-social, altruistic people, there's some relationship between that and elements of low self-esteem. Because if you're agreeable, you're sometimes you're sacrificing your own interests for the good of other people. So that's hatred is probably a slightly different construct from low self-esteem. I mean, that really is feeling something intensely negative and maladaptively so. And a pronounced example of this would be people that have what's called borderline personality disorder, which is when you basically have a fundamental fear of abandonment, and you deal with this, and you're highly emotionally dysregulated, basically like a child, and you can oscillate between extremes of feeling. I mean, literally between narcissism and feeling that you're the best person in the world, often as a way of compensating for and dealing with negative feelings. And then when that narcissism is punctured and something negative happens, you engage in a narcissistic collapse back into just hating yourself, really despising yourself. And then eventually you gradually very slowly in such people get back slightly more to normal, and then you're not, and then you're sort of swinging back to being narcissistic again, or that sort of thing. So it's mental ill health. People at the individual level who hate themselves, genuinely hate themselves, often will have just poor mental health. Will have lots of negative feelings. Maybe you get into a spiral of depression in which something goes wrong in your life, and then you start to become depressed, and this causes negative thoughts, which spiral into more negative thoughts, and eventually you get to a point where you genuinely believe that you are worthless, and you wake up in the morning and the first thing you think about is killing yourself because you are rubbish, and all the people that you know would be better off if you were dead, and there you have self-hatred.
What do you think we're seeing in the parts of the British and the Western world? And we use the word woke, so we're talking about the woke people, and that can be defined any way you wish to define it. When we have those individuals who seem to be promoting policies that are damaging to them and the country, there's a term coming out now called suicidal empathy. We're inviting other cultures, other people into our lands. They're raping, murdering, assaulting us, but yet we won't stop it because we think it's the right thing to do. And that's what I sort of mean under the self-hate, as in we don't like ourselves that much. We prefer those people. Is that self-hate, or is that virtue signaling?
But I think that's a lot of different things. I think we should certainly distinguish between people at the individual level who genuinely hate themselves, and people who hate their ethnic group, or who hate their race, or whatever it happens to be. I did a book recently called Woke Eugenics: How Social Justice is a Mask for Social Darwinism, in which I look in quite a lot of detail at this kind of thing. So what we should distinguish between is really two quite different kinds of human: those that are individually oriented and those that are group oriented. And we have group oriented foundations because we are a pack animal and we have to cooperate as a group and fight and battle against other groups for scarce resources. But we also, at least in prehistory, have to reach the top of the pack hierarchy, particularly if we are men, in order to pass on our genes. So there's the individually oriented moral foundations are concerned with equality, so that you as an individual get more, relatively more, and harm avoidance, so that you as an individual are not harmed. And the group oriented foundations are in-group loyalty, obedience to authority, and sanctity versus disgust, because what sanctity often involves is sacralizing that which is good for the group and tabooing that which is bad for the group. Now, conservative people are about the same in all five moral foundations or values, but liberal people are high only in the individually oriented foundations. And interestingly, when you look at the moral circle of liberal people, those whom you regard as important to you and worth making sacrifices for, or whatever, for conservatives, it's a series of concentric circles that emanate from self. So you love your family more than you love your kin more than your social class more than your ethnic group more than your race more than your species more, and so on and so on. With liberal people, it doesn't work like that. The moral circle is more distant from self. They are much more inclined to like another social class over their own, or another ethnic group over their own. Now, why do they? And remember, they're individualists. What group-oriented people are about obtaining power for your group, and as part of that, sacrificing perhaps your own power. In a sense, having an aspect of low self-esteem. What individually oriented people are about is getting power, resources, whatever, for themselves. And so, of course, you can see that if you care about a different ethnic group over your own ethnic group, or a different class over your own class, then what you can do, what that would incline you to do, i.e., if you love a foreign group and hate your own group, is collaborate with outsiders, collaborate with people of a different group against your own group in order to obtain power over your group. And that's what left-wing people do again and again and again. You get upper class people that identify with and care more about the working class than about their own upper class, and thus create a coalition with the working class to get power over the upper class and thus the country as a whole. So that's an aspect of leftism. Another aspect of leftism is there's personality differences. People that are group oriented, unsurprisingly, are more pro-social. They're higher in agreeableness, they're higher in conscientiousness, they're higher in mental stability. People that are individually oriented are low in agreeableness, they are low in conscientiousness, and they are high in mental instability. Now, again, how does mental instability cross over with power? Well, being mentally unstable, i.e., feeling negative feelings strongly and perceiving the world as this dangerous, frightening place that's out to get you, makes you want power. So there is a relationship, positive relationship, between being mentally unstable and being Machiavellian, i.e., wanting to get power. And there is a relationship between being mentally unstable, of course, and narcissism, where you tell yourself that you're perfect and wonderful, and you want narcissistic supply. Power gives you narcissistic supply, so therefore you get power. So basically, left-wing people are individualists. They're individualists, but they're also mentally unstable. They're full of negative feelings, including perhaps low self-esteem on some deep level. And this means they fear a fair fight. So they don't play for status overtly. They do so covertly, rather like women do. They do so via virtue signaling. What do they virtue signal about? What are they concerned with? They're concerned with equality and harm avoidance. So they virtue signal. They identify with a group that's poorer, that's less developed, that's whatever. And they say, "Oh, I'm so concerned about this," and so they virtue signal while collaborating as well with a different group, their way to the top. So they're essentially born traitors. There's a degree to which that's true. Now, of course, I don't want to overstate the case. There are, I'm sure, genuinely people, you said suicidal empathy, people who are very, very high in empathy and agreeableness, such that it overwhelms all other considerations. And their response to, I don't know, starving children in Africa is so visceral, and it overwhelms so much else in them that they get involved in the left. There will be people like that, highly agreeable people that get involved in the left. But as a rule, that's what you're dealing with. So it is, in a sense, there is an evolutionary niche or a means to get power whereby it is adaptive to hate your own group. And then the other thing is that if you are individually oriented and you are jealous and you are you're resentful, you feel you should have more power than you have, you're narcissistic, you're entitled, you think you deserve to be at the top. Well, of course, you're going to be resentful against all of the symbols of power, all of the things that are associated with power, all of the structures of power. So you're going to want to tear those down. And so that's why you get this loathing on the left or anything that's traditional, because that which is traditional is symbolic of power. It's a power that you don't have. It's symbolic of a group of people that you're not part of, that you want to be part of. And so resentment makes you want to tear all that down. And also, if you do that, then you create a sense of chaos. You unanchor people from traditions which make sense of their lives, and in that kind of chaos, it's easier to sort of take power. So you can see that for some people there is something adaptive for them as individuals to hate their own nation, and then if they make other people do the same, then they take away from those people things which make sense of their lives, things which anchor them and connect them to the past. And those people are therefore looking for something else, looking for something new. And the revolution can be that new thing, and they can be inculcated with that, and they can be made to follow you.
Very interesting. At the beginning of what you were saying, then a word popped into my mind, and then you mentioned that word, which was traitor. For people to be traitors, is that a genetic trait, or is I think that's what it's really genetic signals there for people. Is it beneficial to be a traitor? It might be beneficial for you as an individual, but then if you look at you passing your genes on, is there a benefit there?
As a rule, no. So as a rule, there's nuances to this. So in general, in history, we have, until the Industrial Revolution and the weakening of harsh Darwinian conditions, your child mortality rate is 50%, and you're battling with other groups for resources. And computer models show that the group which tends to dominate other groups is the group that is high in positive and negative ethnocentrism, all else being equal. So obviously, it is not good to have traitors in your group. It's inherently bad, because then your group is more likely to be subverted and taken over by another group. However, if you look at another thing which is useful to have in a group is genius. What is a genius? A genius generally combines outlier high intelligence with moderately antisocial traits. He is low in agreeableness, which means that new ideas always offend against vested interests, but he doesn't care about that. In fact, he might quite like offending against vested interests and stirring people up. He is low in conscientiousness, i.e. rule following, which means that he can think outside the box. He can think the unthinkable, which most people can't. And he is high in mental instability, and so therefore there is a degree to which the world is swirling chaos, and he wants to make sense of it and solve problems. And also, if you're anxious, you're kind of thinking all the time. You're constantly ruminating, which will help you to come up with new ideas. So he's basically an antisocial person. But the plus side then is that he can come up with some amazing weapon, some amazing new idea or whatever, which is of benefit to the group. Consequently, it is beneficial to have a moderately low level of antisocial people in your group. Similarly, if you look at the psychology of the martyr, and it's useful to have people like that will lay down their lives for the group, those people are high in psychopathic traits. They are so narcissistic or whatever that they think that God has sent them to fight to the death for the group, or they just love taking risk. They're evolved to a world of chaos. They love taking risk, and this includes the risk of being killed or whatever it happens to be. So again, it becomes beneficial for there to be a moderate low level of antisocial people within the group. Obviously, the flip side of that, these people are adaptive for the group, but the flip side of that will be different combinations of these negative traits, leading to people that are objectively just negative. So you know, to combine those genius traits with insufficient intelligence, and you just have the useless dreamer. Mix those traits up in a certain way, and you have someone espousing maladaptive ideas. They're bad for the group. You have someone that's a criminal, that's just inherently a psychopath that goes around killing people. That's bad for the group. That is, in evolutionary terms, potentially a price worth paying because of the good side, which is the genius and the martyr. So that's how these negative traits can then stay in the group.
Extremely interesting. Let me ask you my final question, because we've done 2 questions in that section there. My final question is, why do some people, I think we've covered some of it, why do some people prefer the out group? Is that different from what we just discussed? Is there a reason for that? I'm not saying they're going to be traitors, but why do some people automatically look at other people, other groups, and go, I wish we were more like that. I wish we were them. I wish we could be like that.
Well, that's a number of different questions. I mean, you could prefer the out group. If you're saying about that, I wish we could be like that, then surely there's a degree to which people in poor countries must look at rich countries and think, I wish we could be like that. So in that sense, they prefer the out group. It could just be logical. They could say, hang on a minute, these people are more intelligent than us. These people are more pro-social than us. This is a higher trust society. These people produce more inventive and creative stuff. These people are just better people. And I wish my people could be like them. Although from a basic genetic evolutionary perspective, even if your people are rubbish, objective by objective standards, you're probably going to prefer them and try and come up with copes. So, well, we may not be rich, but we were really brave, or something like that. So there's that element to it. But the other element to it, as I said, is if they are individualists, as we have covered, then it is adaptive to prefer a certain niche, for a certain psychology. It is adaptive to prefer the out group because that allows you to obtain power over your in group. Now, then another element to this is that until really quite recently, really, I would say the turning point is 1963. We are a group-oriented society in which it is the group-oriented values that are promoted and that are instilled in people, and people are placed along an adaptive roadmap of life where they're inculcated with these group-oriented values and with adaptive ways of behaving. In about 1963, it seems to me, it flips over. About 20% of the population have been espousing individually oriented values, and it flips over. Because that tends to be a tipping point, about 20%. Once the up-and-coming group reaches 20%, they're seen as the up-and-coming group. They're seen as the Young Turks. People want to be on the right side of history, and so very quickly they get on board, and then you get this flip over into individually oriented values. And intelligent people are more socially conformist, so those people will tend to flip over most quickly. And once they do so, they're trying to gain status in the way that they used to competitively signal group orientation, and in particular sexual constancy. They now competitively signal being individually oriented, i.e. issues to do with equality and harm avoidance. And then you get runaway individualism, and then suddenly off we go. Then eventually you get to the point where I think we are now, where there's actually some evidence, I think, of a backlash against wokeness. But with the trans issue and DEI and self-hate and this idea that you should be guilty for being a man, guilty for being English, whatever, that you're inculcated, rather than the education system, for example, inculcating you with the idea that you should be proud to be English, you should be proud of the achievements of the English, you should be proud of who you are. No, you should be ashamed of who you are. You should be ashamed to be English, you should be ashamed to be male, ashamed of your own importance, guilty or privilege, all this nonsense. And so now, once that happens, of course, then it is beneficial to a certain degree to be a social conformist. So you can see that if hating the English, or at least hating the English is the in thing to do, then it is adaptive for a certain kind of person. For example, a person that's high in social anxiety, they will force themselves via effortful control to adopt that way of thinking and then competitively signal it. So it's adaptive. Well, that crosses over a little bit the neuroticism associated with individualism. But even people that aren't that anxious, that are just socially conformist and want to please people, are going to some extent be sucked into this psychological death cult. And I think that you were talking about anglophobia and all this sort of thing. I think that we English are particularly prone to this. If we look at, well, why did this flip happen, this change? Throughout human history, we have been selecting for a number of traits concomitantly, and therefore they have become pleiotropistically related into what we might call a fitness factor. And they're all partly genetic, at least 50% genetic, sometimes more. In physical health, mental health, religiosity, conservatism, and intelligence. So that's a bit complicated because intelligence, although it's associated with fitness and health, is also associated with social conformity, which is why there's a weak correlation at the moment between intelligence and leftism. But that could flip back. That could revert. And in some countries, it is in the reverse. In right-wing countries, in conservative societies. So we have this fitness factor, and we have 50% child mortality. With the Industrial Revolution, child mortality collapses down to 1%. So obviously you get this build-up in mutation. And what's been found, and what direction will that be in? It will be in the direction of deviating from what we were selecting for under harsh Darwinian conditions, i.e., conservatism, physical fitness, mental fitness, and so on, religiosity. And so, in general, what you find is the evidence of mutation is associated with mental illness, physical illness, whatever, for fitness, even having an old father, because having an old father is associated with de novo mutations, with a high mutational load. People that are left wing, on average, have older fathers. Anyway, so what all this means is that you have this built-in mutation, and that mutation will be in a left-wing direction. Eventually, then you get to a tipping point within the elite or whatever of mutated sort of people, and we tip over into what we have now, into clown world, into runaway individualism. Now, in England, the first point is that with the English, that process started first. We industrialized first. So you would expect the English to have more, to basically be more mutated. Secondly, the environment of England is harsh, cold, whatever, but not as cold as some places. Not as cold as Finland. Not as cold as Sweden. Not as cold as Norway. And so there might be a degree to which, but not as hot as Spain or whatever. So therefore, perhaps we have a slightly larger gene pool than those places, which means you're going to get more people with high mutational load, more people that are maladaptive, more people that are individualistic, more people that are self-hating. Thirdly, I think I've talked in a number of books about what I call a genius strategy. So there's a number of strategies for you to be the dominant group. There's the ethnocentric strategy, that you're high in positive and negative ethnocentrism. But there are other strategies. And one of this is the genius strategy. So let's say you have a slightly larger, somewhere like Finland, it has a higher average IQ than England, than Britain, but it produces relatively few per capita geniuses. Why? Because it's so harsh, the environment is so harsh that you can't afford to deviate much from being absolutely adapted to it. So you have a small gene pool. How does genius happen? Well, it's high intelligence plus antisocial traits. Those things are generally negatively correlated, so it happens by genetic chance. If you have a smaller gene pool, there's less genetic chance. And the second reason is that they're so up against it. It's such a harsh environment. They can't afford to have criminals and deviants and people like that will undermine group cohesion. They can't. That's a killer for them. So they select that out, the psychopathy, but in selecting that out, they also select out the genius. So you don't get many per capita geniuses in places like Finland. You do in Britain, in fact, potentially the most of any country ever. So what's going on there then? Well, you could argue that we've adopted a slightly different strategy. Whereas the Finns are basically quite ethnocentric, and they were the last people in Western Europe anyway to flip over into multiculturalism, and they're highly conservative. The British have this slightly larger gene pool, and they produce, and this allows them to produce geniuses. The geniuses come up with brilliant inventions, and this allows the people to trade, and this allows people to grow and expand, and the gene pool gets bigger, and you get more geniuses and more inventions, and more geniuses and more inventions, and more geniuses and more inventions, and then you can dominate a group. Many, many groups that are way higher in positive and negative ethnocentrism than you are, because of all your brilliant inventions that are a product of all your geniuses. So you become the dominant people. And as long as the level of ethnocentrism, which is low, doesn't drop too low, then you're fine. Now, the problem is our level of ethnocentrism has dropped too low. And why would that have happened? Well, we're in an evolutionary match. And our evolutionary match is 50% child mortality, being surrounded by death, being surrounded by people that are genetically similar to us, all these kinds of things. That brings out our instincts. And that brings out our moderate level of ethnocentrism, whereby we are quite ethnocentric, but we are also prepared to cooperate with foreigners and whatever, and follow this genius strategy accordingly. Put us in this evolutionary mismatch. Our instincts are not induced. And so our ethnocentrism is elevated at times of stress. It's elevated at times of mortality, is not induced. And so for a large portion of the population, the ethnocentrism drops perilously low, too low. And then if you add to this the fact that we're pro-social creatures as well, and we've got this runaway individualism, which is telling us to be anti-ethnocentric, to hate ourselves, then these things together help us to understand why we are like this. Whereas if you move slightly further north, the genius level is lower, the ethnocentrism level is higher, and if you move south, then they are ethnocentric to such a degree that they don't even produce full functioning United Nations. Italy is loads of different mini countries essentially. They're too ethnocentric to be able to cooperate enough to build up a large polity. Go further north, they're a bit less ethnocentric. Maybe than the Southerners, but they can build up a large polity. Other things as intelligence as well as other things that fit in. So, but we as the Japanese, for example, highly intelligent. This makes them more cooperative and highly ethnocentric. But whatever that it is, we are in perhaps this Goldilocks zone of genius and thus low ethnocentrism, and this makes us more prone to these self-hating tendencies than, for example, the French.
Ed, I was hoping you'd make my life easier in this book, writing easier, but I think you've just given me a whole new chapter for the book. You've just given me so many questions and so many things to think about here that I just think you've increased my workload. Thank you very much.
I hope it improves the book. I hope it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely will. You've given me so much to think about, in a different direction completely than what I thought I was going to come out of this conversation with. Ed, let's call it a day there. You've given me too much to think about, but thank you so much for coming along. I really appreciate it. Links to your channels, your books will be in the description of the video. I recommend people go into that and click some of those links.
Great, pleasure. I hope good luck with the book.
Thank you very much. I'll send you a copy as well.
Oh, great. Bye-bye.
Thank you.